Will you pray with me? Through my words, O God, and in our hearts, show us how to serve you with all we have. Amen. Please be seated. One of the most frustrating ways in which we have misinterpreted the gospel is at some point in history we decided that money is bad, that there is no way for us to engage with the world of money and finances and wealth and all the rest of it and somehow be a real, faithful Christian. And there's a lot of reasons for this. As I was thinking about it, I realized at least part of that in our context here is that we're good New Englanders, and we don't talk about that kind of thing. You know, we wouldn't dare to mention money. But I think there's more to it than that, because Jesus, of course, does speak of some of the spiritual dangers of wealth. We all remember St. Paul's words that money is the root of all evil, of course. Except those aren't St. Paul's words. He wrote that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, which is subtle but an important distinction. And I think that is what Jesus is ultimately getting at as he speaks this morning of the distinctions we hold between loving money and loving God, how we cannot serve two masters, that we can either love one and hate the other, or despise one and be devoted to the other, that to try to serve God and wealth is to attempt to split ourselves in a way not just that we shouldn't be split, but a way that we literally cannot be split. We have to serve someone, something. That is how we are made. We act and we live in service to something. The trouble is, how do we do that with money? The world seems to tell us that you can really work and serve and take care of your money and be wealthy and happy and prosperous and kind of ignore the whole God thing. Or you can be a good and faithful and holy and pious and above all poor person. But you can't do both. But then Jesus tells this parable, this weird story, and it's weird even for a parable, let's be honest. This story of the dishonest manager, because we often think of parables as having, if not abundantly clear, at least pretty clear messaging, right? Here's a good person who did a good thing, you should do that. Or, here's a bad person who did a bad thing, you shouldn't do that. Or, very occasionally, here's a bad person who changed and did a good thing instead, you should be like that. But instead, Jesus is saying, here's a kind of bad guy who did a kind of bad thing which was actually probably okay. It doesn't quite make sense. You have this dishonest manager, right? We find out that his master has gotten a bad report of him. I've been hearing you've been squandering my wealth. So you got to bring me an account. Show me the receipts. Bring in your paperwork. And we don't know how or why or if this is even happening, but Jesus tells us the story and it moves on. Because the next thing that happens would be, if this were a movie, this would be where he runs back to the office and tells everyone, start shredding stuff, just get rid of the accounts and move this around and get rid of it all. But what he does in the first century equivalent is he gathers up all the people who owe his master money. And he's thinking to himself, I'm out of a job. And in the first century, being out of a job in this way wasn't just, oh, well, I'll take my golden parachute and land somewhere else nicely, ideally on a small island with flexible tax laws. Instead, he has to figure out how he is going to live. He would have been a member of his master's household. He would have been someone who literally broke bread with his master. And so he's got to figure out not just what he's going to do, but where he is going to live. And so he gathers together all of the debtors, and he starts canceling debts left and right. Because what he is doing, obviously, is building some goodwill, letting people know that he is the one they have to thank for being a little bit less in debt to the richest man in town. And this is where the parable starts getting kind of parably. Because the master's response is not, wait a second, I fired you for mismanaging my money, and your response is to mismanage my money even further and lose me all of these resources, all of these things that I am owed. Instead, he praises him. And maybe it's because when word gets around that this rich man has been forgiving debts and letting people live and letting people prosper and survive, maybe his reputation gets a little bit of a boost from that. But what he really sees, and what Jesus wants us to see, is that this man uses what he has to build community. He uses the resources, the skills, the abilities, the opportunities that he has in front of them for connection, for relationship, for, quite frankly, love. He takes what he has been given, and whatever drove him to it, he takes this and he says, I need to use this to connect with someone because I need people. To admit that we need each other is the beginning of a kind of humility that leads us to acknowledge our dependence on God alone. It allows us to see the truth of ourselves and allows us to understand that we need one another, and so we use whatever we have to build relationships, to build community. And maybe it's just where I'm standing, but people using the resources they have been given to create community, to build community and support. That sounds like church to me. That sounds like the community of faith. We take what we have and we invest it in one another, in this community, this particular place, so that when the rubber hits the road, when the bad news comes, we have a place to land. We use what we have to build that community. One of the incredible privileges of being a part of this community at this time is that we still have people around us who remember when this very building was built. It was just 35 years ago in 1990. So there are still people around who were here to see the ground broken, who were here to see the structure come to pass. One of my favorite stories about the building of this church is that the shingles all along the outside of the building, those lovely gray shingles, they all needed to be hand dipped. There was no way to sort of, industrially stain them all. So we inaugurated the ancient and venerable order of the shingle dippers. And they met in people's basements and in garages and in barns, and they had their shingles and they had their stain, and they dipped them and hung them and dipped them and hung them, and other people came and brought them lunch and made sure they had what they needed. I assume that some of those folks probably still have stain on their fingers. But what an incredible image that all around this building, we are literally surrounded by something that individual hands have touched. That this building, this community, is embraced by the love and care that we have for each other. Because we took what we had and we used it to build community. We used it to build a family, quite frankly. And I know that that word is messy because families are messy, but honestly, so is church. So is community. We build these connections for ourselves and for one another. And it's amazing the way those shape us. Again, this particular building, this particular place that we worship in, that we kind of call our home, one of the incredible gifts that we have is where it is. By God's grace, we ended up with a parcel of land smack dab in the middle of the Rachel Carson Wildlife Preserve. And so that has kind of become a part of us. The fact that we are surrounded by these reminders of God's creation and our call to care for them has become a part of who we are. From the very beginning, and I might be reopening some old wounds here, so forgive me. But from the very beginning, we had a debate about whether or not we should have stained glass in the sanctuary. Because we're a church, and churches have stained glass, and there's a long and beautiful history of it. But obviously, as you can tell, what we decided was something different. We decided that being in the midst of this place, we should appreciate it. And so, right there behind the choir, that image, that view is going to be different today than it will be next Sunday. And in the coming weeks and months, we'll start to see those greens change to red and gold and yellow. And then after that, we'll see the leaves start to fall away, and we'll have just the bare brown branches and the pines in the background. And then when the first snow falls, we'll see it all covered in that blanket of white. And you know, on Christmas Eve, when we have candles in all of those windows, and every once in a while, when the stars align, you get to stand here and see the light from the candles reflecting off of falling snow. But then comes spring, and those bare branches begin to become alive with nature, alive with the new life that we celebrate here. And it goes on. And on, it becomes this cycle, this reminder of where we are and of the creation that God has given us to care for each other. We used to have the pulpit right over there, and I used to actually write down my sermons and preach them from that. Who has time? But I could always tell when there was something interesting going on at the bird feeder behind me there, because people would be looking at me very seriously, and then their eyes would just kind of drift. And they would just get a little smile on their face. And those who were the Sundays who will say, oh, it was a fine sermon, but there was this cardinal. Oh, my goodness. And it was this amazing thing. And I finally decided that I could kind of get over myself and realize that God could preach a better sermon with the birds than I could do with any words. But that's part of who we are. That's part of the gift that we have given ourselves and one another. We have used what we have to build this particular community, a particular group of people rooted in place and time and in the love of God that has been formed and shaped so that we might care for each other, so that we might care for this good creation that God has given us. Quite frankly, I don't think we would have engaged as deeply as we have with this season of creation if it weren't for the fact that we happen to be smack dab in the middle of it. That is a part of who we are. We have taken the gifts that we've given, the time that we have, the money and other resources that are ours to care for, and we have used them to build this place, to make not just this place, but this community. That is what we do as Christians. We care for each other. We build something together that can sustain us. So that when the day comes, as it did for the dishonest manager, as it does for all of us at some point, when everything falls apart, and whether it's our own actions or just happenstance that falls apart around us, we find that it's either personal tragedy or political instability or global insecurity, and it feels like we have no hope left. We find that we can have a place to stand by doing what we have always done, taking whatever we have and using it to build a community, using it to connect with one another, using it to knit ourselves together into a web of relationships and love that will support us and hold us and cradle us when we need it. And when we are able to offer that net of relationships to others, we give thanks that we stand not only on our own gifts, but the gifts of all those who have come before us, who have nurtured this connection, who have made this place, this community, into one that has a place for us, a solid ground for us to stand. We have taken what is ours, if only for the moment. We've taken our resources. We've taken our money, we've taken our time, we've taken our words, we've taken our talents, we've taken our abilities, and we have used them to build not just a church, not even just a community or a family, but we have used them to craft for ourselves an eternal home. Amen.